Evergreen Heart. By Oprian. Chapter 3. Onward to Ponyville. It was later that afternoon when I finally approached the edge of the everfree. I could tell because the vegetation became steadily thinner. The journey itself had been pretty uneventful. I had seen hair nor hide of any creatures. No manticores, no timberwolves, no hydra. Then again, the hydra lived in the bog, not the everfree. As far as I knew anyway. I did run into a small flock of para sprites, but the colorful little insects. What exactly were they anyway? Well, whatever they are classified as, they ignored me. I think I saw a Crusaders as I passed by a pond, but it could have just been a rock or log. The closer I got to Ponyville, however, the more nervous I became. Would they accept me? Would they run at the very sight of me? For all their friendliness, ponies could be awful skittish. I mean, just look at what happened with Zecora. Wait a second, is Zecora even around at this time? Or did she not settle in the everfree yet? For all I know, events could transpire in a completely different order from the show. Considering how the season seemingly changed at random depending on the episode's needs. I mean, one episode it's winter wrap-up, and 2 episodes later it's autumn and the running of the leaves. And how long had I been unconscious anyway? It could have been mere hours or several days. Who knows what events could have transpired since then? I guessed it had not been longer than a few days since my original body had not decayed yet, or been dragged off by scavengers. So less than a week since Luna's return? I had no way to know for sure. I couldn't help but wonder what she and Celestia would make of me. All those questions kept running through my head while I made my approach. I found myself moving slower and slower the closer to the edge I came. My newfound senses were beginning to pick up the occasional woodland critters. I think they were mostly squirrels and mice. But at the time I wasn't accustomed enough to my new senses to tell. It was strange and confusing how my new senses picked them up. It functions somewhat like a natural radar. Anything that gets within a certain distance of me and I just know it's there. The bigger the creature, the easier it is to spot, and the further away I can sense it. However, as I reached the edge of the everfree proper and caught my first glimpse of the orchards of Sweet Apple Acres, I sensed something I did recognize. The vile magical aura of more timberwolves. Yes, apparently the more magic a creature has, the easier it becomes to spot as well. I don't know how exactly I was able to recognize them for what they were right away. But I could sense a trio of them lurking near the edge of the forest somewhere on my left. And if this new gut feeling of mine was accurate, they were stalking something. A surge of anger went through me. My leaves rustled as if caught in the wind as the feeling rushed through me. Whatever those damn things were planning, I was going to spoil it. I turned left and began to stomp through the undergrowth. My anger rising with every step. Apple Bloom was playing hoofball with her new friends Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo on one of the clear patches of land in between the fields of the orchard and the everfree. They had met at Diamond Tiara's cute scenery the other day and bonded over the fact that none of them had their cutie mark yet. They spent some time passing the ball between them until Scootaloo spoke up. "This is getting boring, and apparently none of us are talented enough in hoofball to get a cutie mark out of it." "Aw, don't give up yet, Scootaloo," Apple Bloom piped up. "Maybe we just need to step it up a notch." Putting action to words, she tossed the hoofball up high and gave it a double buck with all her strength, rocketing it back towards Scootaloo. The orange Pegasus filly gave a yelp and ducked, barely in time to avoid getting conked in the head. The hoofball passed over her, the air friction scorching the tips of her primary feathers. "Hey! Watch the wings!" she squeaked, her voice going even higher than Sweetie Belle's. Apple Bloom had the decency to blush. "Sorry." "Oh no!" Sweetie Belle cried out as she watched the hoofball fly off into the everfree forest. "Nice going, Apple Bloom." Scootaloo scoffed. "Y'all were supposed to catch it, Scootaloo." Apple Bloom huffed. "Well, let's go and get it back." Are you sure it's safe, Apple Bloom?" said Sweetie Belle whilst eyeing the forest uncertainly. "Well, Granny Smith always cautioned us about sudden hoof in the everfree, but as long as we stay on the edge we'll be fine, she said confidently. Hey, maybe we can get our cutie mark in a forest exploration. Scudolo chimed in. Hey yet! Cutie mark Crusaders forest explorers, yay! All three fillies cried in unison before running off into the everfree to find and retrieve the hoof ball. Unbeknownst to the little fillies, 3 pairs of glowing eyes were tracking their every move. And as the Crusaders entered the everfree, they began to move in. The 3 fillies spent several minutes fruitlessly searching for the hoof ball, blissfully unaware of the danger that approached them. Are you sure it went this way, Sweetie Belle? Scudolo asked. I think so. Maybe it just went further than we thought. Apple Bloom did buck it pretty hard. Ah said I was sorry. She mumbled, pushing aside several branches in her search. Well, we better find it soon. It's getting late, and if I don't get home before dark, Rarity will read me the riot act. Maybe it's in these here bushes. Apple Bloom said as she pushed aside more branches, only to come face to face with a timber wolf. A-a-I-I-I-e-e. Ruhuyuhuan. The little filly screamed as the beast let out a snort of stinking breath, baring its teeth. The 3 of them began to gallop in the opposite direction, only for their escape route to be cut off by the other 2 wolves. Some pony help, they shrieked in unison. If I still had a flesh and blood heart it would have skipped a beat upon hearing the panicked cry for help. The blasted timber wolves had found their prey, and those voices sounded awfully familiar. I broke into a run, moving as swiftly as this body would allow. And within a minute or so I had found them. 3 timber wolves were circling a group of little fillies. Fillies I recognized instantly. The cutie mark Crusaders. They had the fillies trapped between them. The 3 of them were huddled together and shaking with terror. Any second now one of the wolves would pounce and those poor things would be torn to shreds. The all too recent memory of being eaten alive by these demonic beasts came crashing down on me. It threatened to overwhelm me with paralyzing fear. But the anger I felt earlier burned that fear away with the intensity of the sun. I wouldn't let those sweet fillies come to harm. I pushed the memory to the back of my mind and charged. As I came barreling through the underbrush, twigs and branches snapping loudly as I pushed through them, the nearest timber wolf turned to me and let out a threatening snarl. I would have snarled right back at the thing, but I still hadn't figured out how to produce sound without vocal cords. It must be possible since they can snarl and bark and howl. But I would worry about it afterwards. The timber wolf charged at me, and I brought down my fist smack dab in the center of its snout. There was the whip crack of wood striking wood followed by the sound of splintering lumber as my fist tore through the beast's head, spraying twigs and leaves everywhere. It felt so very satisfying. Something caught my eyes though. My new vision picked out what I can only describe as a wispy cloud of greenish energy that rose from the destroyed wolf and fled into the forest. Now we've seen the green glow in the show, but it never explained where it came from or where it went when a timber wolf came apart. Yet another thing to worry about later since I still had 2 more wolves to deal with. The other 2 growled and stalked closer, more cautious this time. Their maws were dripping with sap like saliva. I stood up straight and tried to make my posture as threatening as possible. I could feel my form shifting as I absorbed the remains of the timber wolf I destroyed and added it to my bulk. They snarled and snapped their jaws at me but kept just out of arm's reach as we circled each other. I kept moving until I imposed myself between them and the cutie mark Crusaders. I took a swipe at one of them as it tried to get past me and attack the fillies. It struck back and clamped its jaws down on my arm. Its clawed legs kicking and scratching at me. Its spike-like teeth dug into my wooden skin. The bark and twigs snapping under the pressure. It still surprised me just how strong and hard those wooden jaws and teeth were. I grabbed the beast's head and tried to pry its jaws open, but it refused to let go. Its partner tried to get me from the other side, but I saw it coming and kicked it away, shattering one of its legs. Good, that would keep it off me for a moment until that leg could reform. My efforts to pry the other wolf off my arm proved futile, so I switched tactics. I swung my arm around and began to smash the wolf into the nearest trees repeatedly. With each blow, chips and twigs would shatter and fly off it, but still it clung to me. I'll give the thing points for tenacity. Behind me I could see the Crusaders scurry backwards, keeping as much distance from the fight as possible. They huddled together in between the gnarled roots of a willow tree, observing the fight with large frightened eyes. At last, with one final smash, the wolf lost its magical cohesion completely and it fell to pieces. I could see the trails of its animating essence flee back into the depths of the Everfree, much like its partner had. That just left me the one with the broken leg. It was rapidly reforming said leg, the green glow that animated it was pulling in branches and twigs to replace the lost limb. I decided to waste no time and lunged at the beast. Grabbing it by the neck and tail, it thrashed and snarled, jaws snapping as I raised it up high overhead before bringing it down hard across my knee, snapping whatever served as its spine in half, before throwing it bodily into another tree. It fell to the ground and looked at me, its glowing green eyes briefly gazing at me with murderous intent before it lost its cohesion and came apart. I stood there for a moment, making sure it would not reform, before I turned to the Crusaders to make sure they were okay. They looked scared but unharmed, that was good. As I approached them, however, I could see the panic in their eyes rising and I slowed my steps, coming to a stop just a few feet away from them and kneeling down to make myself less threatening. It didn't help much. If only I could speak to them. But how? How did I make this damn form talk? There had to be a way. Focus, Aaron, speak. Say something, make noise, any noise. Somehow. My frustration at my lack of success boiled over and I was actually starting to shake with anger. I wanted to scream. To give voice to my frustration. Being unable to communicate is a terrible thing, you know. It's like being a prisoner in your own mind. What's it doing? Scudalo whispered, her eyes full of fear. I don't know, squeaked Sweetie Belle on the verge of tears. Please, Mr. Monster, don't eat us, I promise we taste terrible. Apple Bloom said, her voice sounding shaky. I was never too good with children, never really cared for them, but seeing those three little fillies shaking on the verge of tears, it damn near broke my heart. Come on, I need to be able to talk to them. How does sound work? I racked my brain, or whatever passes for it now, searching for answers. Of course, vibrations and wavelengths. So perhaps. I focused on my insides, shifting around bits and pieces and growing new ones. Don't ask me how it works because I honestly don't know how to explain it. It's mostly instinctual or something. Yet I know that doesn't tell you much. I truly wish I had all the answers myself. In any case, I formed what was essentially a rudimentary voice box and vocal cords. Time to give this a try. I held up my hand in what I hoped was a friendly manner and tried to form a word. What came out was not what I planned. The sound that I made was more like a growling gurgle. All three fillies let out a terrified shriek and bolted, running as fast as their little legs could carry them out of the Everfree and into the orchard. Applejack! Screamed Apple Bloom as I lost sight of them amidst the apple trees. Wait! I managed to moan out. Oh sure, now it works. Just freaking perfect. I punched the ground in frustration. That was not the first impression I wanted to make. Scaring the life out of those three girls. Well, at least they were alive. And that was infinitely better than the alternative. I guess I would have to practice my speech if I wanted to explain myself when Applejack and the rest of the ponies came looking for the monster of the Everfree. And man, does my new voice sound weird. My human voice was rather high in pitch. I'd often wished it was deeper. This new improvised voice sounded deep and echoey. It kind of reminded me of the Protoss from StarCraft. At least that's the best comparison I could draw. Could have been worse, I guess. I could have sounded like Gilbert Gottfried or something. Ha, could you imagine a tree creature speaking with his voice? The sound of heavy hoof falls approaching snapped me out of my thoughts. I decided now was probably not the best time to introduce myself to the ponies. Applejack, being fiercely protective of her family, would probably buck me into next week before I could get another word out. I decided I would return once things settled down and swiftly retreated back into the Everfree. I could just barely make out Applejack and Big Macintosh dashing towards the Everfree before my vision became obscured by the forest. I needed to hide in case they would try to follow me. Trying to blend in with the rest of the woods, I shed the timberwolf parts I had absorbed as well as a bit of extra bulk to make myself thinner. Next I took a stance next to some willow trees and merged my legs together into a single trunk, my roots digging deep to hold me fast. I twisted and split my arms and raised them high. I now pretty much looked like a sickly old tree. I kept still and waited. They didn't follow me too far, and thankfully. I could sense the two ponies searching nearby for a minute or two before they retreated back beyond the forest's edge. The sound of their voices drifted on the wind. I'm tellin' ya sis, there was a monster right here. It smashed them timberwolves and then it was common for us. What in de blazes were y'all thinkin' enterin' the forest in de first place? Came the voice of Applejack. We were use lookin' for our hoofball. Hoofball schmoofball. Y'all could have been killed. Applejack shouted, her voice cracking. Don't y'all ever do that again. You're my only sister. I can't bear the thought of losing you like that. Ei up, said the deep voice of Big Macintosh. Sorry big sis. Came Apple Bloom's voice, thick with tears. I couldn't make out what they said next, but if had to guess there was probably a lot of hugging involved. So what do you think that thing was? Came the voice of Scootaloo. I reckon I don't know, said Applejack. But I'm gonna talk to Twilight about it. Come on y'all, let's get back to the farm. And you three are forbidden from playing back here until we figure out what's going on. I waited quietly for another minute or two as they all retreated beyond the range of my senses before I dared to move, reassuming my humanoid form. It was becoming easier to reshape my form the more I practiced it. I stood there for a moment thinking, at a loss as to what to do now. My plan of simply walking into Ponyville and hoping for the best was pretty much out the window right now. Well, it wasn't exactly a great plan to begin with. The hour was getting late. And with the sun beginning to set, I found myself feeling less energetic. I guess my new form took most of its sustenance from the sun. That made me wonder, did I need to eat? At the very least absorb nutrients, or did I live off of magic? There was so much about my new existence I didn't know. As I contemplated these things, I walked deeper back into the Everfree until I found a small clearing. This was as good a place as any to rest a while. Sitting down against a large oak, I began practicing with my newfound voice. Don't be afraid, I mean, no harm. I practiced the alphabet, and from there I just said out loud whatever came to mind. I even tried to sing a few songs at one point. The results were less than encouraging. Back when I was human, I couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, as my friend was so fond of saying. My transformation had not improved that any. Giving up on trying to sing, I went back to just saying whatever came to mind. By the time I finally had enough of quoting movies and reciting passages from books I'd read, it was well after dark. I looked up to the sky, marveling at how clear the stars were. Back home, living in a city, there was always so much light pollution that it was hard to see all but the brightest of stars. But here, in Equestria, the sky was perfectly clear and there were thousands of them, forming a beautiful tapestry in the night sky. I lay down in the grassy clearing and just stared at the stars, not thinking about anything for a while.